Morning, everyone. We'll just give it another 30 seconds or so till we hit 10 o'clock bang on, and then we'll get going. I've just got to run through a bit of housekeeping first. I appreciate everyone's here for the main planning item, but if you do bear with us, we'll get to it as quickly as we can. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Cambridgeshire County Council's Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Henry Batchelor, and I'm the chair of the committee. I'd like to start by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the council's website. This council supports the principle of transparency and encourages filming, recording, and taking photographs at its meetings that are open to the public. Members are advised that this meeting may therefore be filmed, recorded, or photographed. Please could I ask all members to turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. We don't have a fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if it does sound, then please leave by the nearest smart fire exit and assemble at the rear of the building at the far end of the car park. There are toilets available on the ground floor, as well as refreshments inside as well as outside the venue. Okay, we'll start the agenda proper then with item number 1, apologies for absence. So I'll ask our Democratic Services Officer, Jenna Harron, if she can give us the apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Connor.
Thank you. Move on to item number 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or non-statutory disclosable interests, please? No, I don't see anyone. So we'll take the item as done. And then we move on to item 3, minutes of the meeting on the 17th of July. Members, we've all had the minutes. If anyone that was here disagrees with the accuracy of the minutes, please could you indicate? No, so we'll take those as a correct record and I'll sign those at the end. Okay, so we move on to the planning application that we're looking at today, which has the reference CCC 24048 FUL, and it's a metal recycling facility at Saxon Works in Whittlesea. This starts on pages 31 of our agendas, members, and we have the presenting officer, Deborah Jeekins, with us in the room, who will be presenting the application to us and then taking any questions. So I'll hand over to Deborah to present the item to us. Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. So the application before members today is for a metal recycling facility within existing buildings in the Saxon Works site, also known as Saxon Pit in Whittlesea. The proposal involves the storage, sorting, separation, grading, shearing, baling, compacting, crushing, granulating and cutting of ferrous metals or alloys and non-ferrous metals in an existing building on the site that already has waste planning permission. There have been 30 public representations submitted objecting to this application or making comments, and Councillor Connor requested that this matter was brought before members owing to the public interest in the site. The comments from the public have been circulated to members in advance of this meeting. In addition, on the 6th of February, Stephen Barclay MP submitted a late representation about the application, asking members to refuse permission. The letter was circulated to the committee last week, and so members should already be aware, and I'll address the comments in that letter later in my report. Whilst this application is for a metal recycling facility in the existing buildings in a waste management area, it is of local concern because of the other waste management operations taking place in Saxon Pit, and so I will be covering some detail on that in my introduction. So this is the location of the Saxon Works site. Members were given a virtual site visit as an overview on the 18th of December, which explained the wider site and waste operations within it, as well as the other waste proposals that are due to come before them, seeking planning permission in the future. And as I said, I'll briefly go over these other applications later to put this in context and also to understand the public comments a little more. So the site is also known as Saxon Pit. It's a former quarry on the western side of the town of Whittlesea. It's north of the railway line that you can see here and south of the A605 that runs through the town and then on to Peterborough. The area is where it says works underneath Churchfield, and it's these buildings here that are the waste management area. The nearest residential properties are on Snoots Road and Priors Road, which are here to the east. And there's also a row of terrace houses at the site access. I don't have a laser. Oh. I don't know how to do that. If I can get Sophie to help me, then yeah. Okay. There's not a lot else I'm going to point out. This is now a photograph of the site, and you can see the waste management area in the middle where the buildings are. And these waste management operations are already approved by the County Council. And as I said, it's a protected waste management area under the Minerals and Waste Local Plan. So just as a little bit of background, and because of the public representations and the protected waste management area, there's some information on the 3 waste management operations that are currently approved by the County Council and have planning permission. And these are just background and context to some of the neighbour representations. So F 2019-12 CW is a plastics recovery facility for recycling automotive shredder residue. And these are the buildings that it's proposed to use for the metal recycling. CCC 21024 full is for the Johnson's Aggregates and Recycling Limited, which is an operation that processes incinerator bottom ash to create incinerator bottom ash aggregate. And this is adjacent to the proposed site, and it will be the donor for the metal that's proposed. And then CCC 22092 VAR is the buttressing of the eastern pit face with imported waste. These permits are also, these waste operations are also controlled by permits from the Environment Agency. We also have a number of applications pending decision in with us, and these are in addition to the waste permissions I've just gone through. And these are just raised today again for context, and these are due to come before members in the future, but no decision is being sought on these today. So planning application CCC 24078 full is a proposal to buttress the southern pit face with imported waste for safety and stability. CCC 24091 VAR is a Section 73 variation application from Johnson's to increase the throughput that they have currently for the processing of IBA. And then CCC 25006 VAR is a planning application to extend the time allowed to complete the eastern buttressing. But I want to move on now, having given you the background and context to the proposed development that members are being asked to make a decision on today. It's the use of the existing buildings and machinery that are already on site to recycle metal. As I said earlier, it will involve separation, grading, shearing, baling, compacting, crushing, granulating of the ferrous metals or alloys and non-ferrous metals. So this slide shows the application area in red on the top right and how you come down from Peterborough Road through the access, the buildings from above, and then there is a photograph of what the buildings currently look like. There will be more photographs of that and an explanation later. It's proposed that the metals would all come from the adjacent Johnson site, which processes incinerator bottom ash into aggregate, and it would be conditioned that this is where the metal has to come from, as would be the throughput of waste to limit it to 75,000 tonnes per year, but it may well be less than that. So as I said, the metal would have to come in from Johnson's. It already comes into the site in the bottom ash that Johnson's process, and Johnson's have already separated it from the aggregate that they produce. And so currently this metal is taken off site, and the proposal is to keep it on site and recycle it. The metal will be placed into processing equipment in the building before going through a series of screeners, magnets and gravity tables to separate out the different types of metal based on size and density, and then some of the metals would be shredded. And as the report details, and I've said, the processing would take place in the building shown here, and the majority of the stockpiles of material would also be contained in the building. This is just to show you the red line area for the proposed metal recycling, which is smaller than the planning application area that it would replace, which has permission for the recycling of plastics and ASR that you can see in grey there. And then you can see the extent of the eastern buttressing works as well. Do you want me to go back a slide? Yeah. So the red line area of the application shows the access from Peterborough Road, and then it shows the buildings that would be used. There's in the light grey the wider area of the F 2019-12 permission for recycling plastics that this would then replace. And then to the east is the darker grey, is the eastern buttressing that is nearing completion. But as I said, we do now have an application in to extend that for a limited period of time to complete the buttressing and restoration. So this is just to put it in the context of what's already happening on the site. And then this is a site plan, again, with the area of the plastics recycling, that's in dashed pink line, and the office in yellow, the proposed weighbridge in green, and the darker grey shows the extent of the hard standing that's on site. These are the elevations of the existing building, and the red areas on this plan are the proposed concrete Lego block walls, which would be built and used to contain all of the processed metal, keeping it inside the extent of the building. There would only be minimal outside storage of non-ferrous processed metal, and a condition is proposed that requests that further details of the storage location and stockpile heights to the south and east of the building would need approving before any metal is recycled on site. There aren't any proposed changes to the main structure of the building, but as you can see here, and it has been raised in representations, it is noted to be in a poor state of repair. And so a condition has been recommended that proposes that prior to any works taking place on site, details of the improvements that will be made to the building and to the roof and the recladding should be submitted to the council for approval. And these repairs would have to take place before any metal recycling can begin. And we'd also require further noise monitoring after the improvements to the building so that there can be an assessment of what the noise being emitted is with the improvements in place. And we would require another acoustic report submitted. And this is set out in one of the noise conditions. We have a suite of noise conditions that we're recommending. No new vehicle movements are involved with this proposal, as the metal is already on site and, as I've said, currently removed and it's exported off site. But there is a condition proposed limiting the daily HGV movements. There's been no objections from Highways Development Management or the Transport Assessment Team on this. This is just a routing plan that's been provided with the application, which shows how vehicles bringing the metal from the Johnson site would come in and how those taking it off the site would enter and leave. And as with the Johnson's planning permission, there is a proposed condition stating that there should be no right turn out of the site access on Peterborough Road to prevent vehicles going back through Whittlesea, but instead they should turn left and head towards the outskirts on the A605 towards Peterborough. As I've said, there's been a number of public representations which have raised issues which are not material planning considerations or do not relate to this planning application. And as they were raised in the letter from Stephen Barclay MP, I think it's important to explain why they can't be taken into account in the decision-making process. So there has been concern raised about non-conforming waste that was imported into the eastern buttressing of Saxon Pit. The issue was that this was the wrong sort of waste that was brought in. It happened prior to 2021. This was investigated by the Environment Agency. We worked closely with them, and the Environment Agency concluded that it was safe for the waste to stay on site with appropriate mitigation. The current operator of the eastern buttressing is the same operator that is proposing this metal recycling. However, decisions on planning applications are based on whether the proposed use of the land is acceptable. This means that whilst the concerns about other business operating within the wider Saxon Works pit site are noted and mentioned in the report, they can't be taken into account when making a decision on this planning application. It has to look at whether or not the metal recycling is acceptable. Similarly, whilst the complaints from residents about noise and dust from the wider site cannot be taken into account as part of this decision, officers do continue to work closely with the Environment Agency and Fenland District Council Environmental Health to investigate and address concerns about noise and dust from these other operators as they're raised. And the 3 regulatory authorities are currently working on an information sharing agreement to facilitate this. In response to the public comments submitted in respect of this application, officers have worked closely with Laura Harwood, the Fenland District Council Environmental Health Officer, and have drafted robust planning conditions that, rather than setting limits on noise and dust, they require ongoing management, monitoring and mitigation of those sources. And officers are confident that these conditions would provide residents with sufficient protection should members approve the planning application. And Laura Harwood from Fenland District Council Environmental Health is here today should members have any questions for her. Another issue that's raised in connection with this application by the public and by Stephen Barclay was that water has been pumped into King's Dyke without an Environment Agency permit. Whilst this isn't a planning consideration, I can advise members, having met with the Environment Agency and Fenland District Council earlier this week as part of regular meetings about Saxon Pit, the EA have confirmed that they're currently processing a discharge permit, and this is nearly at the conclusion. As part of the permit, there will be sampling of the water, which will be submitted to the Environment Agency. And this is in addition to the groundwater monitoring, borehole monitoring and gas monitoring that's already undertaken in relation to the wider site and monthly unannounced visits from the EA officer. The public have also raised issues about the possible health risks associated with incinerator bottom ash. And as I said, the metal would be separated from the incinerator bottom ash aggregate. The Environment Agency are the Pollution Control Authority, and they issue a permit for processing incinerator bottom ash within the wider Saxon Pit site. They give Johnson's a permit for the IBA processing, and we give them a planning application because they have, planning permission because they have said that it is safe. The Environment Agency have not objected to this application, and any queries or concerns about health risks are not planning matters. They are a matter for the Environment Agency. Some consultees have also raised concerns about the cumulative impacts from the site, particularly in relation to dust. However, planning permission must focus on the acceptability of the land use on individual sites, and cumulative impacts can't be addressed through planning. Each permission and decision must be on its own merits. That being said, we are already, as I've said, working closely with the other regulatory agencies, and we meet regularly with regard to Saxon Pit. Whittlesea Town Council and I believe one of the public representations have requested a Section 106 legal agreement in relation to this planning application. However, as set out in the report, a Section 106 can only be used to mitigate aspects of a development that can't be controlled by planning condition, and these are usually outside of the site. There are strict rules on when a Section 106 can be used, and they do not apply here. It's not considered that there are any improvements or actions that need to be taken outside of the red line area to make it acceptable in planning terms. The conditions should be sufficient, so there is no need for a Section 106 legal agreement. There's also been a request for an overall site manager or some kind of overall site management of the wider Saxon Pit site. And again, as set out in the report, each planning permission operates independently, and there is no mechanism open to planning to require or enforce this. There is, however, a recommended condition requesting that a liaison forum is set up, and this would encourage information sharing between the other operators on the site. So I just want to move on finally to the reasons that we're recommending approval for this application. Whilst the public concern about the wider site and waste operations within it are noted, the recommendation for approval is for the following reasons. The proposed development is to use an existing waste management facility to recycle metal, which is an alternative waste type to that currently approved. As detailed in the report and already noted, the site is in a waste management area and located next to a business that currently exports the waste metal off-site for recycling. The proposal complies with local and national policy as set out in the report. There are no objections from statutory consultees. The proposal will not bring more vehicle movements into the site, but will use metal that's currently exported from the site. Planning conditions that are active and require validation have been drafted and recommended in order to address the requests from consultees and members of the public for the imposition of more robust planning conditions. So those conditions, as I said, require noise and dust monitoring plans. There'll be a suite of noise limit conditions, one that covers following improvements to the building, that there's further acoustic reporting, and that each of the conditions would require noise monitoring, management and mitigation. So there would be regular monitoring going forward and further mitigations designed if the agreed levels are exceeded. As I said, Laura Harwood, the Environmental Health Officer from Fenland District Council, has provided advice on this application, and she's here today and happy to answer any questions that members may have on dust and noise. Just finally, I've already covered it, and we did cover it in the overview session, but just a reminder about what planning conditions, the tests that planning conditions need to meet, and the tests for Section 106 legal agreements. Planning conditions need to be necessary, relevant to planning, and the development to be permitted, enforceable, precise, and reasonable in all other respects. And planning obligations should only be used where it's not possible to address unacceptable impacts through a planning condition. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Deborah. Very thorough presentation for us there. Members, we do have some public speakers to address us today, but before we move on to that, does anyone have any questions of clarity for Deborah on any of the points she's raised in her presentation just now? Councillor Kindersley.
Thanks, Chair. Just one question, which is in relation to the operating hours. Whittlesea Town Council asked if they could start at 8 rather than 7. I'm assuming that all of the other consents on site are permitted from 7 a.m. and that's why it's not suggested that it be changed to 8.
So the Johnson's planning application, that has 24/7 working, but inside the building. We've gone with the recommendations that we have for environmental health, but it is subject to, if members wishes to tweak that condition, then obviously that's something that we can do.
Councillor Ray.
Can you confirm that if this permission is granted, then the permission to process the plastics is revoked?
So in planning terms, it wouldn't be revoked, but it wouldn't be capable of operating because it would use the buildings that are already there. And so if the planning permission is implemented, it would supersede it, but we can't actually revoke it, but it would supersede it.
For the company to change back to the original plastics processing?
I might need to take legal advice on that point.
Okay, so we could come back to that one. But Councillor Gough in the meantime.
Yeah, Deborah, can you just clarify the ongoing monitoring of noise and dust, which is anticipated? Sort of, I know they're subject to further kind of agreements, but how do you envisage that working, and what's the process by which the effects can be isolated, given the fact that there are other activities on this site, and how effective that would be?
Thank you. If I can start with noise first. So in terms of noise, we're requesting a noise management, monitoring and mitigation plan. So noise management in line with the information that we already have, and there's a proposed condition setting limits on that through which are based on the information on acoustics information that we already have. And then there would be monitoring following the improvement to the building to find out what those are, the levels are, and to see if, I mean, presumably they wouldn't be exceeded, they would come down. And then the noise management plan would also have to say how regularly further noise monitoring would take place, and if there were any exceedances, how that we would require mitigations to be designed. The second part to that is we cannot look at the cumulative impact. We can only look at the source of the noise from this site, and so it is difficult, but it is why we're working closely with Fenland District Council Environmental Health on that, and I'll let Laura come in on that later if that's okay. Similarly with dust, there are air quality monitors. The request is to have a more robust dust management monitoring and mitigation plan coming in that says how frequently they will be looking at the dust. This is also controlled by the Environment Agency permit, but I agree it is difficult to assess which dust is coming from which of the sites. However, the metal recycling is not a dusty operation in itself. So actually, were this proposed on any other site, we wouldn't be trying to have these more robust conditions. They are purely because of the issues at Saxon Pit. But as the officer writing the report, I don't think that this proposed development would contribute to that over and above what's there. And I think it gives us an opportunity to have better control for this area and these buildings.
Okay, if those are all the questions of clarification for the officer, we'll move to our public speakers. So the first public speaker we have is the agent on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Stephen Rice. Mr. Rice, welcome. If you'd like to take a seat at either of the mics. Yeah, so you should have a large button in the middle at the bottom of the console, which switches the mic on and off. You have up to 6 minutes to address the committee, and we have a traffic light system on the table ahead of you there, where I'm pointing. So when the light's green, it means you've got plenty of time. When the light turns to amber, you've got about 30 seconds remaining. So if that does happen, could you start wrapping up? And then red means finish. So please, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Stephen Rice, and I'm the planning consultant who prepared the application. Your officer has prepared an excellent and comprehensive report that assesses this proposal in the context of its compliance with planning policy, and it concludes that having applied the planning balance, permission should be granted. We've discussed and agreed the recommended conditions with your planning officer prior to this meeting. I won't repeat or duplicate the detail in the report, but I am going to use some of my time to explain how this proposed development fits in with the applicant's wider strategic plans for the entire former brickwork site at Saxon and Victory. Firstly, I will just highlight what I believe are the salient points of this application. The proposal is to take existing infrastructure that's already on site and permitted for the recycling of plastics and automotive shredder residue, and use it for the recycling of metals, which are a byproduct of the adjacent recycling operation run by Johnson's Aggregates. Presently, these waste metals are exported off-site for further processing elsewhere, and this proposal allows for the waste metals to be transported a short distance along an internal access road to an existing building that actually contains all the equipment necessary to further recycle the metals, to the point where they can be exported off-site for specialist recycling, where they're melted down and turned into new product. So this facility actually makes use of existing infrastructure, which doesn't require any changes or upgrading, and is a sustainable proposal. Your office has already mentioned that one of the conditions is to improve the building. The applicant, my client, is very prepared to fully reclad the building and improve it once the building has a justifiable use. At the moment it's sitting there, the plastics aren't being recycled, that building is not operating. There is no economic justification to replace all the cladding and the sheeting. But obviously, if it starts processing metals, then it becomes an economic liability to do that. So it allows for a significant improvement to the building, and the conditions, as your officer has pointed out, are actually much more in detail than the conditions attached to the current plastics recycling. So it does actually provide better control of the activity. My clients listened to the concerns raised by local residents and proposes to implement a scheme to improve the highways access. So this hasn't been mentioned by your officer because it's not something that's actually going to be conditioned, because technically this application doesn't increase vehicle movements, but my applicant is intending to improve the access next to the cottages at the road access, and this will significantly improve matters for those cottages with regard to dust and noise. We've also committed to setting up a liaison group to ensure good communication between the operator and the relevant organisations identified in the report. And my client and his agent, i.e. me, are committed to working with the regulatory bodies to ensure the site does operate in a manner that doesn't have an adverse impact on the wider environment or amenity. Which takes me on to the applicant's strategic plans for the former brickworks. It's a very large site. It totals about 190 acres, of which this building forms quite a small part. And the waste recycling businesses are only 25 acres of that total, located in the bottom of Saxon Pit. My client's intention is to get the waste recycling site to a point where there are a small number of businesses operating high quality waste recycling facilities down on that site, ideally complementary to each other. The buttressing works which are currently permitted are short term. I mean, they are numbers of years, but they have to be done. But there is a finite period for those buttressing works to take place. Once they're finished, the only remaining uses on that site will be the waste recycling down in the bottom, and hopefully, subject to planning permission being granted, which is with Fenland District Council at the moment, a science and technology park, which will sit on Victory Works and to the rear of Johnson's. And the remainder of the buttressing and the green area next to the town will be a country park, vast areas of wildlife, and some ground-mounted solar panels supplying power to the solar park, to the science park. So the waste recycling businesses have to operate in compliance with the planning and their permits, because in the long term, they are very small beer compared to the wider use of that site. Now, this should provide the residents with some degree of commitment that this site is going to operate correctly. I hope you can agree with your officer's recommendation and are able to grant planning permission, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rice, and very well timed. So if you could stay seated for a minute in case there are any questions of clarification for yourself from committee members. Members, do we have any questions of clarity for the applicant's agent? I've got two. I'll start with Councillor Kindersley and then Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chair. It was in relation to the wider plan, which I do accept is slightly off subject of this actual planning application. But are we to assume that everything you've just talked about in terms of the solar panels and the science and technology park is a submission to the Fenland local plan?
The entire site is now included for employment use in the emerging local plan, yes.
Thank you. And Councillor Ray?
I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned the site liaison group. Does this apply simply to this activity or to all activities on the site?
Whilst the liaison group is intended to fulfill a condition for this planning permission and technically and formally would deal with issues relating to the metals recycling, my client is the same operator who's operating the buttressing scheme, which is the only other waste recycling activity they are involved with on the site. I think with the fairly good communication we have already between Fenland District Council, I mean, I'm dealing with Fenland District Council a lot now, and with your own officers and with the Environment Agency, who are there weekly. The liaison group, I would suggest, would deal with other matters arising if they are directly relating to the buttressing operations. I can't speak for Johnson's because I don't act for them. And my client is simply their landlord. They operate as a completely separate independent business. So I can't speak for Johnson's, but certainly for the other activity that my client is involved with, it would be me sitting on that liaison group. And yes, we would deal with other matters that would arise, without a doubt, yes.
Okay, so that's really relying on goodwill of the operators.
I think there's an element of having to rely on goodwill, but we already do have communication, and there are already changes that have been made to the ongoing operations on that site, some of which could be controlled through existing conditions, others that have been done to actually improve matters that are effectively unregulated. So I would like to think that I'm the sort of person who will listen, and I do have the ear of my client, and he will listen to me. Yes.
And the second question I've got is about separation of the metals, the ferrous and the non-ferrous. It's clearly very a different kettle of fish to break up copper and aluminium than it is to break up steels. Will they be treated together, or will they be separated in the processing?
You'll have to forgive me. I'll have to rely on what I understand about the separation. But from what I've seen from the equipment that's intended to be used, there is a very large magnet arrangement that separates the ferrous out very, very simply. You're left with a mixture of copper, aluminium, and other metals of non-ferrous. Those are separated out using quite an extensive complex of gravity tables to separate those various different components out. That's already in there because a lot of the ASR, I did actually see that equipment operating in whenever it was 17, before the ASR stopped. And it can separate out quite amazingly different components of different weights by using these gravity tables. So those metals, there's quite a lot of hand sorting of the metals, to be honest with you, that would go on as well. The copper tends to be actually in motors, which are very easily separated out across a table where it passes in front of people who are literally hand picking the metals out. So yeah, they're quite valuable. So there's quite a lot of attention paid to sorting them out into the different components. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Rice? No? Well, Mr. Rice, thank you very much for joining us this morning and for answering our questions. We now have our next public speaker, Mr. Alan Besant. Again, Mr. Besant, welcome. Yeah, either microphone, it doesn't matter. And yet, same procedure as before. So you'll have 6 minutes to address the committee, and at the end of which, if you could just stay seated in case there are any questions for you at the end.
Okay.
So please, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. So Saxon Gate Residents Group, the group has meetings with all relevant agencies and councils, as well as some operators. As far as we can tell, we are not recognised by the applicant, other than when we receive legal threats from them. We would like the committee to please confirm they have read the submissions by Saxon Gate Residents Group and Whittlesey Town Council. It's disappointing that the cumulative effects noted by Public Health England on all the applications and the wishes of some kind of central management of the site, the permits, planning permissions, and self-approved permits can't be considered. The agent says the source of the metal to be processed will be from the Johnson Aggregates Recycling Incinerator Bottom Ash, which is a sealed site and strongly permitted. The bottom ash is a toxic material. There's talk of forever chemicals, and it's seen as a risk to the environment if not handled correctly. I do think the dust from there is a specific concern more than dust per se from, say, quarry operations. The applicant requests consent to process 75,000 tonnes a year. Johnsons have confirmed even if their new planning is passed, they will likely only create 7,000 to 15,000 tonnes a year. It makes no sense to us, and we ask why such a vast extra requirement of 75,000 versus 7 to 15,000 a year. Saxon Pit is a sealed clay pit and will flood without drainage. Over recent years, all planning applications give drainage schemes that rely on pumping water, trade effluent, unfiltered into the Kingsdyke, a waterway which has suffered several pollution incidents in recent years. Historic permissions listed from the middle level will not take into account the new operations, the non-conforming waste, or risks like the industrial bottom ash. We believe the EA are finally taking more samples, but we will not know the results for some time. The discharge is not authorised and must not happen without a permit. We would ask, when will the County Council push the operator in the EA to resolve this situation? The current permit inquiry has been running for a year, we think, while the pumping continues. At a planning presentation for this applicant on the 25th of January 23, the agent, Mr. Rice, promised to install air quality monitoring equipment in an area which we think is well placed for this new application. The recorded quote, in this room says these results will be shared to the local authorities in the Environment Agency. We know that they can also be placed on a portal so the public could view them, which Fenland District Council do with their equipment, which is some distance from the pit. To our knowledge, no information in data has ever been provided to officers from this equipment. Could access be considered as a condition so the applicant not only installs the equipment, but has to share the information in an open and transparent way with the public and the agencies? Incinerator bottom ash residues are a key concern for residents, I say again, and the science on that is moving quickly. The EA record on average 30 complaints a month related to Saxon Pit, noise, odour and dust. Noise complaint levels have slowly improved. I say slowly as Cambridgeshire County Council do not seem to undertake timely real-world validations for the levels promised in planning applications. The Environment Agency set different levels and worked to create a noise plan for their permit. This incremental iterative improvement can take years before mandated noise levels are reached. Please set viable timely noise validation plans in any approval. We can't see how noise levels from old equipment left idle for years in a dilapidated building can be predicted, and surely noise from metal must be more than plastic. The old shed asbestos fibre cement is to be replaced by metal cladding. We think there should be insulated sound barriers, and Public Health England also suggested acoustic barriers, I believe. We note the EA have stopped commenting on planning applications in detail due to resource. They rely on their permits. This means planners lose the opportunity to coordinate planning and permit conditions to help enforce noise levels, as one example. Lastly, in October last year, there was a significant odour event for a couple of weeks at properties near Saxon Pit. The EA saw a 2,000% increase in complaints. The EA did not attend, and they did not validate the source. Fenland Environmental Health did attend, but it was not their jurisdiction and they have made no public comment. We understand Cambridgeshire County Council investigated and said the applicant here today was responsible. The EA said the applicant has not accepted that finding and there's been no public comment from the applicant to our knowledge. Situations like this have destroyed our trust in the system and the ability for the patchwork of regulators to control things, although we have noted there have been moves to improve that. As presented and based on years of hard-found experience, we feel this proposal will cause nothing but harm and upset to the nearby residents, and it will be some years before it reaches any level of promised operation. Thank you.
Mr. Besant, thank you very much. Okay, so members, do we have any questions of clarification for our public speaker, Mr. Besant? No, I don't see any. That's obviously very clear. So thank you very much. Would you mind popping the mic off before you sit down? Do you mind turning the mic off? Is that okay? Otherwise, we might pick up what you're saying. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So, members, those are all of our public speakers that we have registered with us today. So we can now move into the debate part of proceedings. So, yeah, so if members have any further questions for any of the officers that we have with us today, or equally if people want to put forward a position on this particular application, then this is the opportunity that we have now. I'll start with Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question to the officer, really, about the, we've heard a bit about the liaison group, and here, just listen to the speaker there, their group not being recognised. If, and I'm actually a sitting councillor on a liaison group elsewhere, and I've sort of seen the benefit from these, but the, I guess the question would be if the residents, the group that are set up at the moment, are saying they're not recognised, if they were part of that liaison group, how much weight does that hold, and would they be, then at least be recognised for what they are as a community group as well? It might not necessarily be, it might even be slightly legal on that one. I don't know. It's sort of between the two, maybe.
Thank you, Chair. This may not answer your question, but there was a couple of points I wanted to make on the liaison forum. So, and in respect of Vice Chair's question earlier to the agent about that. So the recommendation for this, for a condition for this site is that there's a liaison forum and that we would want details. We have recommended membership that doesn't necessarily include public membership, but that doesn't mean that the public can't speak to their local councillor to have those issues raised. One way to address the communication between the different businesses operating, and they would need to agree to this, is that there is a recently convened liaison forum for the Johnson's planning application, which is separate to meetings that Johnson's had with the Saxon Gate resident group. I think they had about 6 meetings, but that was not the liaison forum that was requested as part of the Johnson's planning application. There has only been one of those meetings, but what we could do is we could request that the different liaison forums that set up, the Johnson's one for this, and if there was one for either the eastern or southern buttressing going forward, could share the minutes from those meetings with each other after they've taken place. I think my recommendation would be not to have one group of residents represented, because there could be people they're not representing or other groups, but they should feed what they would like raised. They could obviously attend, but perhaps not as a speaking part. They could raise that with their local councillor. And my reasoning for that, but it's obviously is that what happened with the confusion with the Johnson's liaison forum is that the Saxon Gate group met with Johnson's at least 6 times saying it was a liaison forum. County Council wasn't there, wasn't invited, so it wasn't the liaison forum that was requested. So I think it's about making sure liaison forums are making sure that the public are kept up to date through the regulatory agencies and their local councillors.
Yep, thank you for that. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate the response. I think just as a comment, really, I mean the liaison group that I'm involved in is made up of myself as a county councillor. There's a parish councillor. Then there is there are a couple of members of the public there representing various groups, and it works very well. Obviously as well as the applicant. But I think I'd like to see that moving forward. I think that'd be whether that's something that we can set up, but see where it goes anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Councillor Wood, are you indicating?
Thank you.
Just a flick of the wrist. Couldn't see.
Sorry, but yeah, I know, that's fine. Thank you very much for that. Yes, I have read all of the representations from the local residents and the council. I also know the area reasonably well. I am minded to allow this application so long as it conforms to the legal requirements and restrictions on noise, particle emissions and smell. And supply vehicles do not pass through the town of Whittlesea, as all movements appear to be on site only. It would seem that the application would increase the efficiency of processing, bringing such recycling on site, whereas it is presently elsewhere. I'm aware that the wider site cannot be included as a planning consideration, but many residents are concerned about the levels of noise, dust and smell emitting from the site under the present operations. Their views regarding this application are exacerbated by the belief that the relevant authorities are not enforcing the restrictions presently in place for previous site approvals. It is reported that such applications should fall within the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Minerals and Waste Local Plan 21, which ensure various protections, including those requested by the residents. Is this the case? And should the residents have faith that operations at the site will be monitored to ensure noise, dust and smell levels are within the limits that allow them to feel comfortable within their homes? Might it even be possible that our approval of this planning application will actually encourage the whole site to adhere to the restrictions raised by the residents of Whittlesea?
Okay, thank you. So I think general consensus of support for the application, albeit a question around the details on how the air quality, etc., is going to be monitored.
Yeah, based on what I've said, I think, as long as the regulations are made and adhered to, I see no problems. But the residents, based on their representations, don't have the faith in that based on what's happening at the moment and the restrictions that should be applied at present.
I mean, might it be helpful if an officer, either Deborah or the environmental health officer, actually ran through what exactly is being proposed in terms of monitoring?
Okay,
Might
that
that help?
may well be useful, yes. And if there are any concerns that it hasn't been operating satisfactorily previously.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how much we can comment on what's happening currently, but
I understand
obviously
it's a separate issue.
what we can ask. So I'll ask Deborah, who's to answer this one? Yourself? Okay, and you, Councillor Goff, as well. Okay, so we'll have, before we get the officer
That's
on
fine.
board, we'll come back to that, but I think we have 2 questions from Councillor Kinnersley and then some from Councillor Goff on the same subject.
Thanks. So Mr. Besant made reference to the operator committing to monitoring of various things which either hasn't happened or the data hasn't been provided. So I wonder if we could have clarification about that. And the second issue is in relation to odour that emanated from the buttressing, where the Environment Agency didn't appear, Fenland did appear, and we, County Council, appeared, but the operator did not accept that the odour was from the buttressing. So if we could have some clarification on that, because I think in the report it says at some point that the County Council's belief that what the odour did come from the buttressing.
Okay, and Councillor Goff, is your question on the same topic?
Sorry, it's very related. So
Might be worth taking them all at the same time, then
Yeah.
we can try and answer them on bulk.
So, I'm participant in a couple of liaison groups too as well, and I find them very, very useful, but they depend upon a certain amount of trust between all of the parties. And one of the failings is the sort of asymmetry of information between the parties, which doesn't help that building of trust. We heard a suggestion to make available to in a public way the monitoring data which is collected on an ongoing basis, and I would just like to hear from the officers as to whether that's realistic and whether they would be in favour of such a ongoing condition.
Okay, thank you. And then Councillor Gardner, I believe you've got a question. Okay, fine. So the questions for officers we have now are, what's the officers' views on the sharing of the air quality data and actually having that conditioned, I believe. The second one was around the general process of how the air quality is proposed to be monitored in this application, clarity on the perceived failures of the current monitoring situation, and some clarity on the situation around the odours emanating from the buttressing. So there's quite a few there. I don't know who's best to start.
Chair, air quality and noise.
Air quality and noise, apologies. So Deborah, I'll start with you. Appreciate we might need to call our colleague from the District Council as well, but Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. No, I definitely will like to call a colleague from the District Council. But if I can address, I wrote down about the odour from the buttressing and whether that's been accepted or not. Obviously, it is separate from this application, but in the enforcement update report that I believe is following this item, it does explain that a planning contravention was served by the County Council in respect of material that was brought onto the buttressing that was not the inert soils that it should have been, and that was the cause, as far as we can tell, the cause of the odour. And to us, the developer, I'm sure Mr. Rice, as his agent, can confirm, did agree that yes, they didn't initially think it was the source of the noise, the odour, but it was. They wouldn't use that again, even though the Environment Agency had allowed them to use it. They wouldn't use it again, and they've gone back to what is permitted. So I wanted to cover that aspect off. So it may be, I'm not disagreeing with Mr. Besant, that the Environment Agency may not have concluded that, but we concluded that working closely with Environmental Health and Laura. In terms of, I'll probably leave air quality to Fenland District Council, Environmental Health, but if it's okay, I'll go through some of the conditions and what we're proposing and how that would work, because I think those are the questions. So there's a suite of conditions on noise. There's a standard one with regard to mobile equipment having broadband reversing alarms or similar. Then there's the there's the setting of noise limits based on the acoustic report that was submitted with the application, and they would be there, and they are at the boundary of noise sensitive properties. Then we would need a revised and updated noise assessment, and that would detail the noise impact from the processing of metal. So in a sense, once the building's repaired, they would have to start processing metal to do that, to find out what that noise is, and how it's being insulated, what the repair would do to bring that down. Then another condition saying about the management, monitoring and mitigation plan for ongoing operations, detailing how often they'd monitor, how they'd monitor, and obviously we would send that draft to environmental health to have their technical opinion on that. And then what the noise limits are, how they're already being mitigated. We've still got the overarching, these are the levels that you can't exceed, and then how they would record, investigate and respond to complaints, and then how often they'd review and update the plan. And I've thought long and hard about this condition so that it doesn't just say you have to meet this noise level. How do we keep going with the monitoring going forward? And happily, obviously, I have shared these with Fenland District Council, Environmental Health, but they may have other comments on, and they may not, on how to improve them. Similarly, with the dust, what we're asking for is we need to know exactly where, and these are specific points that Environmental Health put in their consultation response, where and how materials would be stored on the site, confirmation that any vehicles would be suitably covered, how the operator will make sure that the access road to the site is kept clean and material isn't tracked from the site, details of how the maintenance and operation of the air quality monitoring device that's already installed at Saxon Pit, that it needs to stay there, that it needs to be in good working order, how often they would be looking at that monitoring the data generally, and also specifically, and this is something that Fenland District Council wanted for materials of 10 micrometers or less, but if you want further details on that, you'll need to ask Laura on that, and how that air quality information will be assessed. And so I think these are the questions that members are asking will come out in the plan, and if our technical expert says that's not good enough what you're proposing to do, then we won't approve the plan. We'll say go away or work with environmental health to make that better. So at that point, it's probably best to hand over to environmental health to hopefully explain that. Yeah.
Councillor Kindersley?
So that sounds like a very iterative process back and forth, and I just want to be assured that the residents group / liaison committee, or whatever it looks like, is included in that iterative process, at least to an extent that they can start to build confidence and trust in the process, if that makes sense.
So because they're technical submissions, we wouldn't normally consult with the residents group, but we do, I'm sure Mr. Besant will agree, we communicate very regularly, probably at least weekly. So we could say when information has come in, we could ask the planning agent if we can share that information in draft form. It's not something we would normally do in planning, but this is, as we talked about, a contentious site. So this is something that we could look at, but we do need to bear in mind that it will be a technical submission, and the residents may want something that environmental health, as our technical consultee, says, well, that's either not practical or that's not possible. Or so yes, I can say that we will take steps to involve them, but it wouldn't be through a formal what's your opinion on this.
Okay, so I think at that point it might be worth inviting our colleague from Fenland District Council from the Environmental Health Department, Ms. Harwood. So yeah, obviously you've heard the sort of discussion we've been having as a committee, and you've obviously heard the response that our planning officer Deborah's given. I mean, is there anything you want to add on the on what's proposed in this planning application from an environmental health perspective? Please.
Yep.
Good morning. Yeah, Laura Harwood, Senior Environmental Health Officer for Fenland District Council. So, so I've made some notes. So clarification on the noise monitoring and dust monitoring. And one of your earlier questions was sort of about how we isolate the noise from this activity, because we've got a mosaic of different activities going on site. So we would put the onus on the applicant to have appropriately qualified people undertake the noise and dust monitoring. And the noise monitoring, they would have to give us a plan, would have to see how they were going to go about it. It'd have to follow BS 4142, which is the standard methodology for them monitoring this noise. If it's outside the scope of BS 4142, if it doesn't fall into the scope, we can have a look at it and agree it, but I would look for them to fall within the scope of the British standards. It means we can repeat it. It means that any other operators using this site would also be using the same methodology. The way that we would calculate noise is the conditions which have been recommended have fixed points, so we can replicate that. It also gives us consistency on all of the monitoring of which we do across the site, and that helps being able to compare when we get different pieces of monitoring coming over different periods of time, different days and nights and months, that we've got some fixed parameters so we can compare against those. So that helps. We also use calculated noise levels as well as actual noise levels. So we will say to every applicant, go out and monitor background noise levels to give us an idea of background noise levels. They will give us the background noise levels for that moment in time of which they've sampled. They will then have to give us some ideas of what the predicted noise levels are going to be. This site isn't operating as they've requested to do so they're not doing the metal recycling. So everything they've provided us is predicted noise levels, and they've calculated that back to these points. That's one of the reasons why we've asked for validation monitoring to happen. And they've also given us a set of mitigation measures. And they've said these mitigation measures are predicted to be able to mitigate to a certain level. Because those, again, are predicted mitigation levels, that's why we've asked for the validation monitoring and further monitoring to happen after they've done these works. If they've gone away and they've done the works and the noise level's been brought down by using this concrete block system and repairing areas of where noise escape could come from, then they, if they brought it down and it's in line with what they've said in their initial noise assessment, then that's good. If not, this gives us the ability to be able to go back and say, go back, reconsider, have a look at different things. Some of the things that I'd brought up in my original planning statement, sort of like orientation of the building and the fact it's open at the front, so you've got the directionality of noise. They are things which are concerns, and this gives us the opportunity is if the predicted noise levels aren't what they say they're going to be in reality, we can go back, we can measure what they are in reality and have a look at those mitigation measures again. It does, I understand what the residents have said, you know, timescales, what's the timescales of this? Some of this is, there's the timescales on the amount of time they've got to put this planning application into effect and to do the works. We can build timescales into that, but if they are providing mitigation measures and we don't agree that they're sufficient, then they'd have to go away. So it is hard to be able to say timescales, but what it doesn't do is give us a finite noise level to say, oh, well, we've done that, that's it. We've discharged that condition. The same with dust monitoring. I'm happy. Do you want to interject now? Or I'll keep going. The same with dust monitoring.
Yeah, keep going.
So with dust monitoring, what they have predicted and what they have said in this application is that it can be controlled through dust abatement systems, that it's not an inherently dusty process, although as residents and officers have raised that there is going to be an element of dust with this process, and that needs to be managed. It needs to be managed in the process, but also as the materials eventually do leave the site. So that's there, but also this is a working document. So if they have in their application, they have listed the different sorts of processes they're going to do. We can't see exactly how that's all going to work in the detail of the application, and these things might change over time. So that gives us the ability, so should matters arise, should we have adverse weather conditions, so we have really long periods of exceptionally dry weather, which we've seen over the last few years, then we can have a look at making sure we can build that into the dust management plan. Clarification on the AQ data. Yes, it's absolutely possible to have that data on a portal. The equipment which they currently have installed in the quarry is exactly the same equipment that Fenner District Council have installed in the district. That's linked to a national air quality website run by a company that supports DEFRA with their local air quality management. And it is administrative about getting that information to public. Whether I agree or not that it should be public information, I think it should come with some clarity. The where they are monitoring is within their operating hours, in their operating area. That area is going to be more dusty than outside the boundary of their operating area. I monitor in a residential location. So I would expect that all air quality to be well within national air quality guideline levels within that residential area. That is not the same level of expectation I would have within the operating area of the process. So if we get data, and I haven't seen data from air quality inside this pit, I wouldn't expect it to be the same as my data. So I think it needs to come with clarity that of what levels are we expecting to see and what should tolerable levels be within this pit. And a lot of that would come down to the Environment Agency within their environmental permit. Is there anything I've not answered?
So I'll ask committee members, but I think you've covered the potential sharing of the air quality data, clarifying the current proposal for monitoring air and noise quality. Is there anything that we've missed, members? Councillor Gardner, for you, and then
Chair, well, it's just one point of clarification. I don't know whether it's for Deborah or yourself to answer. If, say, you find after a period of time that the noise levels are greater than what has been predicted, I assume from what you've said that then you can go back with the county and say, well, you need to do X further mitigation measures to get those levels down. Is that correct? Or would they have to submit another planning application?
I think this might be a Deborah question, but I would look at the conditions, and what we have proposed is conditions. So in their noise impact assessment, they said they can achieve levels of a certain amount. That has then been replicated of what they said they can achieve in their noise impact assessment in the proposed planning condition. If they don't meet the levels in that proposed planning condition, that's a breach of planning. So that would be a Deborah question. If they then yeah, I think that's probably where it comes down to, as simple as that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think there's two elements. We're trying to do belt and braces. So there's the overall limit that we've put in, but then alongside that, there's this management and monitoring. So when you're trying to enforce a planning condition, somebody can be in breach and you can serve a breach condition notice, and then if somebody doesn't comply with that, then it's an offence for which we can prosecute. However, prosecution is expensive and it doesn't necessarily resolve the issue. It just takes somebody to court. And that's why we have this other proposed conditions that actually, as well as this bottom line, you've got the belt, the braces are, we want this continual, how often you're monitoring, what you're looking for, what do you do when you find it? And this is a new kind of condition that I've not worked with before, which we've designed specifically for this site to have that. It's not just set in stone, and it's set in stone, and we need you to keep telling us you're complying with it, not wait for a complaint to come in.
Thank you, Chair. So from what you've said then, I'm assuming if we found that the noise levels were greater than predicted, you would then be expecting the applicant to come back and say, we're going to undertake this to get the levels down to what they've predicted.
Yeah, so their plan that we want them to submit for approval will say almost exactly that if it doesn't reach that, this is what we will do, but not just the once. We will keep having the opportunity to say, okay, it's changed again, now we need to mitigate differently. That's the aim of this more kind of validation active planning condition.
Okay, thank you. I've got councillors Wood, Gough and Ray. So Andrew.
Thank you. It would be remiss of me not to reinforce the comments that we did read in the representations from local residents and Whittlesea, in as much as they have their view of the situation is raised mainly because of the present situation on the site and the perceived failings to monitor and enforce the restrictions that presently exist. If everything happens as is planned, I don't think anybody would have any problems. But do you have any comment to address the concerns of the residents in that way, as to how it's not being addressed under the present circumstances, and to give them faith that it will be in the future?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I think they're correct in saying that this goes across lots of different regulatory bodies. That most of the activities in this site are regulated through environmental permits. Those environmental permits are regulated by the Environment Agency, and any site which is regulated by the Environment Agency and an environmental permit takes precedent on how they are enforced and monitored, and that's undertaken by the Environment Agency. It withdraws the power from the local authority to be able to do certain things that you would expect a local authority to be able to do. We are there, we are present, we are monitoring, when the phone rings, we endeavour to answer it as much as we can. And, there are opportunities where we've been out and we've seen something, we've smelt something, we've heard something. And then we can, and like we've said, it's really important that we get to the point where we can effectively share data on all of this for it to be regulated. I don't know that I don't agree that we're not regulating this site. I think we are, to the ability that the powers give us to be able to do so, and we have to work within those powers.
Do you want to come in, Deborah? Yep.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Laura, because I would echo what Laura's saying, but I would also say that where there are planning conditions for the site, they are being not always proactively monitored, but we do investigate any complaints with regard to exceedance of dust and noise, and then pursue, as we did with the odour, even though odour is not normally a planning issue, it was as a result of the wrong kind of soils being used. One of the issues is obviously cumulatively. Another issue is to do with the some of the dust is to do with the access road itself, which is mentioned in the report, as is the operator's intention to improve that, which isn't required as part of this permission, because this permission wouldn't have an increase in vehicle movements. But the operator of the eastern buttressing and this permission, if members approve it, is the landowner and does have the power to make those changes that would improve the dust emissions at the rear of the properties of Peterborough Road, where the access is, and resurfacing. And again, a dust management plan for this wouldn't just say we'll wet it down. This dust management plan will require them to keep making improvements. And then the other thing I wanted to say is with regard to the eastern buttressing. The planning permission was first granted in 2002. It was temporary. It keeps getting extended. And because the requests for extension are just about time, what we had been looking at is the schemes for dust suppression, etc., dating back to 2002. Now, what we're looking at and working with Fenland District Council Environmental Health on is when we're looking at the extension for the eastern buttressing, we will be looking at saying the similar thing with dust monitoring, management and mitigation. Not just we will do this and it's what we said we'd do in 2002. We will be looking to make more robust conditions. So in summary, we are working within what we have. We are working closely with the Environment Agency, and we do pursue all breaches of planning control. And we try to work with the operators as well, but we will enforce where we need to, as with the planning contravention notice, which then resolved that issue.
Thank you very much for that.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So I've got speakers, councillors Gough, Ray, and then Kindersley. Neil.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thanks to the officers for a helpful discussion on this matter. And I think the sort of iterative sort of continuous improvement approach to conditioning is maybe novel, but it's most welcome. But having listened to the discussion and going back to my previous point about sort of trust, I sort of still come to the conclusion I can't see any reason why the sort of monitoring data on an ongoing basis isn't something which is made available to the liaison group. I guess my question for officers is, would that need to be conditioned, or does that happen through the suite of recommendations you have at the moment?
So I think we heard from Laura that the information could be available through the portal, but it's whether, I think the question is whether we want to make it, condition the fact it is made available.
And I think to just clarify my point, that would be to the participants and the liaison.
Okay. Deborah?
What we could do is we could add some wording to the proposed conditions that says that the information would be shared publicly. I do think that there's a risk of saying who we will share it with. I think saying we're going to share it with you because you've made contact with us is perhaps not the best approach, but to share with the liaison forum, and that it can be made public. My suggestion would be that we check the wording for that with chair and vice chair after this, if you're happy, or I could try and work something out now, but I want to get it right.
Understood. I'm happy to, if the other members of the committee are in agreement, I'm happy to leave that to
Sure,
the
but
chair and vice.
the principle of including that in a condition in whatever form the wording takes is acceptable to officers.
I think it would be saying that we would want the commitment in the plans that, the dust management monitoring or noise one. And I don't see an issue with that, just listing it as one of the bullet points that we've got there. Yeah.
Okay, no, understood. I think before we make a decision on this, I think we'll cover that specific point in detail, just to make sure the committee as a whole is happy. Okay, we've got Councillor Ray next, please.
Yeah, can I return to the issue of noise, but really as an example? You've got a very complex site with many activities going on at different times. I notice in the planning the conditions that you're setting, quite rightly, very specific noise levels: 39 decibels in one location, 37 decibels in another. Do those very specific limits, which, it's about the noise a small fridge makes, apply to just this activity, or to the noise from the whole site? Because as a resident, you are concerned not where the noise is coming from, but how much noise there is overall at any one time.
I'm not sure who wants to take. Laura, do you want to take that?
Yep, I can take that one. So the condition can only relate to the site, so I couldn't impose, relate to this activity. So the noise attributed to this activity should not exceed more than those decibels specified, and those locations are on the boundary of Saxon Pit. So it's where we reach the first points of represented receptors. As you can see, there's lots of residents, and we have picked 2 representative locations. So hopefully they should represent all of the receptors, not just those 2 properties. But it would just come down to, this is the noise from this activity.
So in that case, if there were similar limits for other activities, what would be the cumulative effect of both those reaching their limit? Is that what you're talking about, the mosaic and the modelling?
When we were saying about modelling, what we were modelling is we would calculate back so if we had 15 pieces of equipment and all those pieces of equipment came to a certain noise level, we would say, right, though by the time that noise got to these residential properties, it would have attenuated by a certain level, and it would be of this level at that boundary. So that's what's calculated, because we can't measure it actually. And then we compare that to the background noise level. I can't do a cumulative impact assessment, although I am very well aware of all of the different activities going on site. So I have to consider this activity and what suitable noise levels would be. in their noise impact assessment, they said that they calculated the noise levels back and they could achieve noise levels which were well below the current background noise levels for that geographical area. Those background noise levels were measured with other operations going on at that time. So it was the character of the area was taken into consideration. So they have said, I'll just find it because if I quote it, I will misquote it, and I don't want to do that. So they have said that the difference in the limit and the background noise levels which they monitored at that moment in time was on Priors Road 8 decibels below the background noise levels, on Snoots Road 10 decibels below the background noise levels, and on Peterborough Road 14 decibels above the background noise levels. That's why I was keen to use the levels which they had identified they could achieve in their noise impact assessment as their levels, because they are below the current background noise levels. So therefore, although individual bits and pieces of noises would be heard or identifiable, because these noise levels are a noise level derived over a period of time, so it's a type of average, then they would be below the current activities in the pit itself and the road noise and every other noise available.
Okay, that's very helpful. So the 39, is that the level they've achieved or think they can achieve? And that's so the ambient level, if you like, would be 8 or 14 decibels in excess of that.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question for Ms. Aywood. It's a general comment.
Before we let Ms. Hayward go, does anyone have any questions or final comments or, again, further questions for our colleague from Fenland District Council's Environmental Health? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time and for your in-depth answers. They've been, helpful to us making the decision, so thank you. Okay, your general comment, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. I would like to thank officers, including from Fenland District Council, for their answers, and because they've given me significantly more confidence in the application than perhaps I might have had at the beginning of the process, just from reading the report. I think the conditioning with the iterative process is excellent for both noise and for dust. And so my remaining concern is focused around community relations and the liaison group. Like Councillor Gough, I chair a liaison group, and it's my experience that local residents are very, very much more well-informed on particular issues of concern, and usually for I'm thinking drainage in my particular case, and have many, many years experience. So I would like that, even if it is a group or a residents group, as well as the town council and the local members, to be included in the list of attendees for the liaison group, because I think that is only going to be a positive, because I think that part of the problem with these sites is the lack of trust between the community and the operators for a wide range of historical reasons. And it's down to us, if we have the opportunity, I think, to do what we can to encourage the growth of trust. And the liaison group is going to be key to that. It's clear, I think, also that the owner of the site has a much wider vision for the site, so it's very much in their interest that they take the community along with them. And so I hope that they are kind of generous in sharing of knowledge and data and so on with the community. I think that if we feel comfortable with that, and I do realize that this is a kind of woolly element to the planning system, but actually it is the thing that really matters most if you are a resident close or adjacent to or impacted by a site which is subject to a planning application. So if the committee is confident that all of those things will happen positively with the liaison group and the inclusion of the community in whatever form that takes, then I would move the recommendation to approve.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So I think throughout the debate, we've had two suggestions for either additions or alterations to conditions. One is around the sharing of data, which I think officers as a concept are in favour of, wording to be decided. So on that point then, are there any members that wouldn't want that included or edited as part of the conditions? No. Okay, so we'll take that as one that we will add in. Then the second one's the one that Councillor Kindersley just raised around the liaison group, about whether is the question around formalising an official invitation to the liaison group for the residents group, or maybe not the public in general, but the local residents group that will be directly affected by anything that happens on this site. So again, I'll give officers an opportunity to comment on that, because I know we have touched on their invitation or not to the residents, the liaison group, sorry. So Deborah, I don't know if you had any comments on that suggestion.
Thank you. Yeah, so condition 24 as stands recommends the setting up of the group. And so my view is that wouldn't necessarily need changing. My suggestion would be that the informative that sets out who should be included is changed to include. And I think we would have to, and so the condition requires a scheme to be submitted for approval, and we could include in the informative how they will engage with residents groups. I just need to be very I'm mindful that there is a really strong, and they do a great job, residents group, but there could be other residents as well, and I think that we need to just be mindful that we're not just focusing it all on that residents group. So I think in the wording as it stands, it's fine. The agent is here and is hearing that members want the public included, and it'll be for him to come forward and say how that would happen, and we will include in the informative, if members are happy, that it should how they will include members of the public and residents groups.
Yes, I'm happy with that, and I'm assuming that Whittlesey Town Council will be involved anyway, and it's normal that they would nominate one or two town councillors to go to these kind of groups.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Deborah, is that right? Yeah, we're getting nods. So, okay, so with that amendment to the informative part of condition 24, again, are there any committee members that disagree with that addition? No? Okay. So, and I think we had a proposal, Councillor, with that you would like to move to the decision on this. So we have the decision to approve with the conditions as set out in the document. With those two additions, one around the sharing of data and one around the membership of the liaison group that is to be set up as part of this. So Councillor Kindersley is proposing that, correct? And would anyone like to second? Councillor Gough, I saw you first. So, okay, we'll move to the vote on this then. We can just do this by a show of hands, Jenna, is that right? Yeah, okay, so can I ask all those who are in favour of that proposal to raise your hand? So Jenna, could you confirm that's unanimous?
Yes, that's unanimous.
Okay, good. And then for completeness, anyone against and anyone abstaining? Good. Okay, so that resolution is passed unanimously with the addition of those two conditions and informatives. So thank you very much. That item is now complete. So thank you very much to all of our speakers that joined us today, and to the officers, obviously, from Fenland District Council and the County Council as well. So thank you very much. We do have a few more items, members, so please don't disappear. Next up, we have an update from our officer, Alex Rankin, on the enforcement and monitoring report. Alex, if you'd like to join us at the table. Is this your first time speaking to us at committee? Oh, okay. First one speaking to me anyway as chair, so welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I don't think there's no introduction I need to give. I think you're just going to introduce the report for us, aren't you?
Yeah, I've just got a little speech to go. So good morning, I'm Alex Rankin, Development Management Officer, Specialist in Strategic, and I'm here to present the Enforcement Update Report. The report before members today gives an update on enforcement and monitoring work and formal enforcement action that was undertaken by the team since the previous report was presented on the 20th of March 2024. As set out in the report, officers have delegated authority to undertake formal enforcement action and serve notices, provided that they report this planning report this to Planning Committee, and that's the purpose of the report. So section 3 and 4 of the report provide detail on the current extant notices served by the team, and we are still awaiting decisions from the Planning Inspectorate on 3 separate enforcement notices in relation to land at the Pig Unit Ellington, land behind Caucus Crisps, and in relation to land off Mill Road for Drayton, which have all been appealed. So all of these notices relate to the unauthorised importation, storage and processing of waste. In addition, a breach of condition notice is in force in relation to the former Allen Skip Hire site at 10 Mile Bank, Littleport. And the details of these investigations and the process that led to the service of the notices can be found in Appendix A. The team have delegated authority to serve an enforcement notice accompanied by a temporary stop notice in relation to the land at Beech Lodge, Morrow, and we have taken legal advice and are finalising the drafting of the report, the drafting of the notice for service in the near future. Once served, officers will need to update members again in line with the scheme of authorisation to officers. Current enforcement investigations are detailed in sections 5 to 10 of the report, and local members and parish councils have been notified of the sites where the investigations are in their area and where formal enforcement action has been taken, and officers keep members updated at key stages in the investigation. And then since the report was drafted, the team have served a PCN on the operator at Station Quarry Steeple Morden, which is referred to in section 10 of the report, and we are currently finalising the planning contravention notice for Gosling-Strove Farset, which is referred to in section 9. So there are no amendments or recommendations within the report, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions members may have on the content.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.
That's really helpful. Members, do you have any questions on the report from Alex? Councillor Kindersley.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing on Station Quarry and Steeple Morden, which is in my division. But what I was going to ask about in particular was, I realise all of these different places are very different, and it can be very complex. But I was struck by the time between, this is the Beech Lodge Morrow enforcement notice, the time when we wrote to them saying that we were going to seek authority on the 4th of September 2024, and that has not yet happened. Here we are in February 2025, whereas the next item, which is at Yaxley, it was served, the notice was served in a matter of 6 weeks. It would just be helpful to have some, an explanation for the difference, which I'm sure is they are just different sites.
Yeah, I'd also, thank you for the question, add that Yaxley was a planning contravention notice, and they're slightly different to the enforcement notice, and I think it's the first time we've actually we'll be serving a temporary stop notice in relation to Beech Lodge. So it's just more work is required, and PCN is, so I'd say, a quicker process. I think Deborah is going to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Echoing what Alex has said, the planning contravention notice is a legal questionnaire and there's no right of appeal, because why would you need to appeal? We're just asking you questions. So it's quite simple to get one out. We do think carefully about the questions we're asking. In terms of a breach of condition notice, enforcement notice and stop notice, we do need more liaison with legal, because you only really get one bite at the cherry, and if we just get it wrong or write the wrong step to comply or don't think something through, it will either go to appeal or it just won't do the job it needs to do. And so yes, it does take more time, and every site is different anyway, but we haven't, as Alex said, we haven't actually, since I've been here since 2016, served a stop notice. So we particularly need to make sure that we get that right, because we're telling someone, not only do we not want you to do it and we're serving an enforcement notice about that, but we're actually serving a notice that tells you you have to stop now, which obviously we need to make sure that we're doing that right, because they have a business and they have rights. So that's why it's taken longer.
No, thank you both for that. Members, anything more for Alex? No? Alex, thank you very much. Thank you for coming and speaking to us today. Members, the final item on the agenda we have is item number 6, which is the summary of decisions made under delegated powers. I'm not proposing on asking any officer to introduce this, but we have the report in our papers. So it's just a question if members have any comments or questions on that item. Indeed. If the answer is no, then that concludes the business for today. So just leaves me to say thank you very much to all the officers, all of our speakers we've had today, and obviously to committee members as well. So thank you very much, and we'll close the meeting there. Thank you. Oh, members, I think it's likely we're going to have either next month or April's committee date. Deborah, do we have confirmed which yet?
There will be a March. Sorry, I'm not sure of the question. There will be a March committee.
Are we meeting next month?
Yes,
Yes,
there will be a
okay.
March committee. We're not sure yet about an April committee, but
Okay.
there will be a March one.
So keep the date in your diary for next month, members.
The 5th. It's early.
Yeah,
the
I'll
5th of
delegate
March.
that to Deborah.
Yeah.
The 5th. The 5th.
Yeah.
5th of March. Yep. Okay. Now that really is it. So thank you, members.